The Mission Impossible series is sadly concluding with its final chapter, The Final Reckoning. It is the eighth film in the series, serving as a direct sequel to Film 7, Dead Reckoning, as well as a sort of wrap-up for the entire franchise. If you have not checked out Mission Impossible, I would recommend it. It is a favorite series of mine. I'm sure you'll get plenty of joy and thrills and all the good stuff out of watching the series. You know, watching through the back catalog is not a chore. Even what I would consider to be the worst entry is still a unique swing at the formula, at the series, with some recognizable strengths. You don't have to watch all the films in order to watch this one. It is very self-referential of the series, this installment in particular. So you'll definitely get more out of it. You'll understand some flashbacks and things like that a little better with knowledge of the whole series. But, you know, we're here for the set pieces, we're here for the thrills, and those are going to be there regardless of whether you understand who the people are or not. You should probably watch Dead Reckoning first if you're just going to jump into the series at this point. Although they do make, I think, a concerted effort to fill you in on what happened in the previous film if you have not seen it. So you might be able to just jump in with this one. You should watch all of them though. The series, in my mind, hits a groove from really 4 to 6. That's the sweet spot. Brian De Palma's direction in the original is absolutely compelling. 2 is a hard miss for me, but, you know, like I said, it has some fun strengths at least. It tries things. 3 feels, you know, a little bit visually misguided, a little bit stale under J.J. Abrams, but it has Philip Seymour Hoffman, and that makes up for a lot of sins. Christopher McQuarrie became the guardian of the franchise starting with the 5th installment, which is Rogue Nation. At that point, the franchise kind of begins to be more of a franchise and less a collection of individual films. Part of that, like, formal series quality, the fact that Fallout is a sequel to Rogue Nation, 5 and 6, Dead Reckoning, and then The Final Reckoning, also a film and a sequel. Part of, you know, the fact that it kind of turns into that collection of films coincides with, like, an increasing gravity and seriousness of Ethan Hunt specifically and the things that he faces in the face of, you know, world danger and all this stuff like that. There's an increased focus on him, the sacrifices he has made, just like this intensity of his character. This to me is really where the series starts to lose some steam. Fallout is where it starts for me to show some warning signs. But even so, Fallout is my favorite in the series. So just having some warning signs in my mind, which I'll get into, is not like a death sentence. Absolutely love the things that Fallout does with the action, with the set pieces especially, and with some of the supporting characters that are involved in that film. And despite the awesome work though, Fallout is the first movie where I found myself thinking that this was a weak talking film. There's always some talking, there's always some setup of exposition, of description of plans, description of stakes, you know, description of, oh, I don't know, whatever, like the IMF leader talking about, you know, what they're up against, why Ethan Hunt's been disavowed this time, you know, all the usual stuff. There's a decent amount of talking in every movie. But I think as the series goes along, and in these, the latter half of it, it starts to transition more into what's wrong with Ethan Hunt, or what is Ethan Hunt going through. And the series is always about Ethan, but just to me, it gets a little bit too serious for what it's able to support. And yes, I know there's still humor in these later, like, more serious movies. You know, like I said, it's like the Ethan Hunt as a human being angle, which is emphasized more, and I don't think there's support for. So coming into Dead Reckoning, I was having, like, a couple of uncertainties with the series. Then we get Dead Reckoning, which I would put 6th of 8, personally, in the films. And The Final Reckoning, I would put 7th. Like with every movie in the series, there is a floor from the action, from the Tom Cruise insanity. And like each of these movies, I think, has a standout extended action sequence or suspense sequence, perhaps. With 7, it's the whole chase, most of the entire chase in, was it Milan, I think, wherever it is in Italy. And then in 8, it's the underwater stuff. But there are a couple of specific things, I think, that hold back, like this specific duology, 7 and 8, the Reckonings. There is a lot of talking, especially in 8. That's not necessarily a problem. Talking's cool. Love talking. Some of my favorite movies consist entirely of talking. My frustration is more that it just feels like they're full of the most basic version of the ideas that are being expressed and the lines that people are saying. They just all feel so bland. It's exposition that needs to happen, sort of, usually, kind of. Exposition can be really cool. You can have exposition happening and not really even notice it. You notice the exposition. You know there's a lot coming at you. And it's just like rapid fire. It's like people delivering setups directly flowing into other people giving setups. Like the scene in Dead Reckoning, perfect example of this, is the initial, you know, informing of Carrie Elwes's character. It's every military head in perfect sequence delivering the next 2 lines about AI nonsense. And 8 has the same problem. There's a lot of talking, there's a lot of uninspired, very, you know, I kind of hate to use the word cliche because it gets a little bit overused for things, but very cliched, simple lines. And that's fine to have as like a simple device in your movie, just like throw some information information across, let's get onto the thing, right? There's too much of it for how simple and frustrating the things the movie has to say are. If you can manage to get that stuff out of the way faster and then just go like crazy set pieces, because that's what we're here for anyway. We're not here for the contrived nuclear threat. That's great. But this movie is almost 3 hours, and a lot of it is lame, boring talking. This is going to be a weird illustration, but it was just something I was thinking about during the movie, and there's a specific reason why, which I won't spoil. But after you finish The Final Reckoning, I recommend go watch Failsafe, the 1964 movie, I think, Sidney Lumet. Very different movie, of course. Very serious movie, deals with nuclear threat, similar to the way The Final Reckoning does. There is a very specific part of each movie that lines up, and to me, I was just thinking as I was watching Final Reckoning, like, this can be so good. This setup can be so good if what is being said has literally any weight. If it has a medium amount of weight. If you watch Failsafe, I think you can see the full effect of like such a bland, sanitized script, because, you know, it's like the look at what they have to do to mimic a fraction of our power. Final Reckoning is doing all this stuff, all the action set pieces, all these like different threads coming together, and it's coming together to just like hype up this nuclear threat. And look at what Failsafe can do with just the dialogue, with just the simple stuff. Again, exposition can be fine. There's just too much of it that's too bland. The movie has a ceiling because of that. But the much more interesting thing to me is the way that these two movies, this duology, is shot. As soon as you jump into 7, you can immediately tell, or at least it jumped out to me, like we've got a different visual style. There's a different DOP. There are a couple of things I think that are specifically noteworthy. One is they really, especially in 7, I didn't notice it as much in 8, lean into the Dutch angles, which kind of feels like we're a nice point of punctuation in the original Mission Impossible. I wonder if there were, meetings behind the scenes that wanted to bring in like that sort of old school Mission Impossible feel to the way the movie was shot. They go way overboard. It kind of loses the spice factor that you have when it's something special. Although, to credit where credit's due, they use some of those Dutch angles really well to frame like groups of people as they're kind of like disappearing into the horizon a couple of times. But too much, it's got to be something special, and the movie leans into it way too hard. The other thing that really baffles me is some of the way some of these conversations are cut together. There's one primary example that it's just, I think it's the most concise way to show it.
What's your objective?
Kill the entity.
What about killing Gabriel?
He knows what the key unlocks.
Why else would the entity want him to kill someone you care about? Everyone else thinks they can control the entity. Only you want to kill it.
Caveat real quick before I dive into this. Like, I'm not a cinematographer. I'm just like I would like to think I'm an informed enthusiast. So, if I'm wrong on the way this comes across, feel free to let me know. I'm willing to learn something new. Now, it's a conversation between Luther and Ethan Hunt. So 2 main things stick out to me from this little segment here. Eye lines, spatial awareness. Conversations in movies have a sense of space to them. There's, the typical language pattern in which we kind of expect information to be laid out, and that is the pattern because it is effective, and that's the way our brains work. People are placed in a scene, you use some kind of long shot to establish where they are in space, and then you usually cut to close-ups, maybe like a little 2-shot establishing where they are at the table. You keep track of where people are in space because you see movements, you see the way people look at other people relative to each other, right? Usually you would expect if someone's on this side of the screen for one shot, they would be looking over here at the person on the other side of the table, right? As they're looking over here at the other person that way, right? You're tracking where they're looking, help you, keep track of where people are in space. It is worth noting, disrupting that sense of space can be a powerful tool, right? Just like any rule, best practice, we'll call it. Best practices exist because they are usually the best way to do things. Breaking rules can be a very powerful emotional tool. Not denying that. Usually you got to break rules for a reason. Usually you follow the best practice. So the scene to me has extremely poor spatial awareness, which is also goes along with the eye lines. So we don't see when Luther sits down, for one thing. He seems to just transition from standing up to suddenly he's just like the windows seem higher. So I guess he's just sitting now. We didn't really see that part. It seems like a small thing, but it's part of us losing track of the visual space here. We see him in this new seated position. We start shooting Luther from a higher angle. He's clearly looking up at Tom Cruise based on the aforementioned eye lines, right? We see this connection between like this higher angle, Tom Cruise looking the other way. We see also Luther's face is kind of like further to the right in the frame, and he's looking off kind of to the right. And then we cut to Tom Cruise, who's like actually on this side of the frame. That's not necessarily the end of the world. Again, it's like it's a weird sense of space for a pretty mundane conversation where there's nothing like earth-shattering happening. It's just a conversation to help two people understand some things. And we've got like this very strange, jarring framing that doesn't give us a good sense of where things are. It feels very chaotic, and you would expect that to go along with a sudden point of chaos or something like that. But this is just a regular conversation. And then the other thing we get just a few seconds later, we get like suddenly this cut to this other angle, flipping the action line of the other side of Luther's face. And suddenly his eye line is pointing over here, which does actually match with where Tom Cruise is on screen. But Tom Cruise's eye line does not change. He's just the same. So we're flipping around Luther for some reason. And there's no point of emphasis. Flipping the action line can be very powerful. Again, just like any rule, if you break it, it can be powerful. It can be emotional. It can cause the audience to have a sudden realization, like something changed. I should pay attention. I don't know what point there is to emphasize here. It's just part of the conversation. This is, to me, like the worst offender in Dead Reckoning. There are a couple of other scenes I'll probably show clips of in here somewhere. There are a lot of times where we kind of have strange visual setups like that give a strange sense of space. My kind of charitable interpretation of some of this stuff is the film is kind of trying to inject a sense of action into the dialogue scenes as well. They are trying to create something visually arresting, put it that way. Even though we've got like a lot of exposition, even though there's a lot of talking going on, the film is still trying to present you with different things to look at and visual changes and things that kind of like draw your eye, for better or for worse, I suppose, to kind of keep you rolling, to kind of keep the momentum going, even though there's no action going on. There are still things happening, and that is what they're trying to draw your eye to. I just think this comes across like they don't trust the lines being delivered, which I think is appropriate. But I think the problem is, like, if you can throw in eye candy, you can throw in stuff that's kind of like weird and unexpected and that grabs your attention, but like it's still just candy. Like you can't eat too much candy, you'll get sick. Even if you provide like the best possible interpretation, the most charitable interpretation, it's still not substantive if it's not backing up, if it's not punctuating something interesting. And I don't think like this scene, especially some of the other scenes that have the weird framing, are really backing up anything interesting and not adding anything of substance. And again, like there are times where this fun visual experimentation, we can call it. Maybe it's just something that had to be cobbled together in the edit. I don't know. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the interesting action approach works. There's this scene early on where Ethan, Benji, Luther are talking about the heist. There's this fun kind of pivoting action going on between the three of them where it's kind of bouncing around, creating different triangles as the key passes from person to person. I think that's really fun. I think that's a great way to spice up like a quick dialogue scene. Not a quick dialogue scene, an extensive dialogue scene, and give it momentum and give it an action feel in an action movie. That I'm a big fan of. The non-traditional stuff, we'll say, the film is doing later, I do not think works. One spoiler note, and this kind of goes along with the script annoyances, because the script annoyance is perfectly summed up in the finale, in the very last thing the film leaves us with, which is Luther's letter, or Luther's message, whatever, for Tom Cruise, which is the most bland, offensively inoffensive sentiment of just like, oh, why doesn't everyone just be nice? Then the world will be great if everyone's just nice and stuff like that. And that's the thing the film leaves us with, the most whitewashed, sanitized possible version of a message that a movie could leave us with. And it's just such a sour note to end on, and I think that's a real shame.